all, welcome to today's podcast. I am Nupur and joining me today is Gerardo Ferrayes, a tax lawyer and accountant from Mexico, currently partner with VCG Partners with 13 years of experience in tax domain. In today's podcast, we will discuss the crypto asset tax and its regulatory landscape in LATAM countries, especially covering the Mexican region. Welcome, Gerardo, to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. And it's always good to chat with you on different tax or in general, any topic.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Nupur. I'm very happy to be here. I think that this matter is very new, very interesting. And I also admire you professionally. We went to the LLM together, and thank you for having me here.
Yeah. So just going on to the discussion, legal, regulatory and tax implication for crypto asset varies widely across the globe. There is no internationally agreed standard definition of crypto asset, and there is no standard taxonomy of the different type of asset that comprises of crypto asset. Hence, there is a lot of issues in terms of for classification, or how there is no unified mechanism of classification of such asset. So one may have to look at the economic purpose, the right and liabilities associated with the different form of asset, and the way they derive value while deciding on the characterization, classification, or other issues in this sort of industry. And hence the accounting and treatment accordingly depend on these factors. And even the way it has come across, some countries are laying down guidelines, some countries are not laying down guidelines. Some say that, okay, if the guidelines are not there, you just have to follow the normal procedure as laid down and test the taxability in the current available laws. And even the heads under which these income are taxed varies across the globe. Some taxes it under capital gain, some say this miscellaneous income. So, of course, one has to be mindful of the laws and regulation when trading or transacting in these sort of transactions. Coming to you on the first question, what is the general tax landscape in Latin American countries for crypto asset taxation? How do you see LATAM as a market for crypto asset space?
Yeah, I think that is a very good question. As a way of disclaimer, I'm a Mexican tax advisor, so I can just be very sure of what I am saying in Mexico. But I think that a first summary is that most of the LATAM countries right now are lacking of regulation, legal regulation, and even more tax regulation. One of the few exceptions, and I think that one of the most important ones, internationally speaking, is El Salvador, because they have acknowledged Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as a legal tender, and they have exempt most of the transactions from a tax end to try, I think, to benefit from all of these types of transactions for their economy. But besides El Salvador, I would say that most of the Latin American countries they're having their first efforts to regulate crypto transactions, but they have not succeeded so far. And a good example of this, and I will get into more detail in the following question, but it is Mexico, because we have a fintech law in place, which does not regulate all kind of crypto transactions, but we don't have a tax regime. So the regulation gives you some hints on how to apply the general tax regime in Mexico to these type of transactions, but we are going to discuss this furthermore in detail.
Yeah, that's what, and I think that is the general trend in all the region. It's not just LATAM, where the practices vary diversely. Some countries are very reactive, that they do something happens. Some countries are proactive in taking or launching some sort of regulations. But indeed, investors have been looking at LATAM as a market for crypto from long time, I would say. And also, it could be because of multiple reasons. We'll discuss those questions in more detail in the later part. So since you touched on the Mexican side already, can you elaborate more on the Mexican law, whether there is direct taxation only or indirect taxation, or how the tax aspects should be analyzed from the Mexican perspective?
Yeah, sure. Let me talk about the regulatory perspective and the tax perspective. So when it comes to the regulatory perspective, as I said, we have the fintech law, which provides for a definition of virtual assets. Okay, so what is a virtual asset? The problem is that the scope is very narrow, and it only encompasses transactions with cryptocurrencies or crypto assets that are used as a means of payment. So what happens with this narrow definition is that a lot of different crypto assets as NFTs do not follow within this scope. So I would say that this is one of the first things that we have as a definition, that it is helpful, but I think that we need to have more definitions to try to cover different types of crypto assets that now are very, I would say, like famous in the industry that are being used a lot in transactions. So I would say one important thing. The other important thing is that also there is a prohibition to the financial system to execute internal transactions with virtual assets. So that tries to say to the financial system, like, please do not play like that. From my own reading, do not play with this type of assets right now, because we're not very sure how do they work, and we just want to make sure that there will not be any type of problems in the Mexican financial system. So besides those two things, we don't have a lot of regulations right now when it comes to virtual assets. So then you go to the tax landscape, and I think the question is, what is the regime? And the answer is the general regime that applies to intangible assets. In a nutshell, the problems that we have faced in Mexico is that because we have a general exemption for foreign currencies, but this exception does not apply to cryptocurrencies because they are not recognized as a legal tender in Mexico. So this exemption does not apply. And unfortunately, as of today, most of the tax advisors in Mexico have the position that selling or purchasing a cryptocurrency might be a barable event, subject to VAT in Mexico, that our general rate is 16%. So this is not very good for business, right? Because you're not expecting to charge VAT whenever I'm trying to use a Bitcoin to pay a service or a purchase of goods. So this is not a good incentive for the industry in Mexico. And second is when it comes to income tax, because I mean, there's certain discussions of it is more like an investment, or you need to determine a capital gain, but we have a very formal system in Mexico that requires to have a tax invoice to support the cost of the crypto asset. This tax invoice is an electronic invoice, and it is very difficult to obtain. So most of the entities and companies that are acquiring crypto assets from Mexican resident clients, they are not able to obtain this tax invoice. And if they don't have that tax invoice, they cannot deduct the cost. So it's a little bit crazy, because if you want to operate right now in Mexico, you have to tell your clients, first of all, the transaction should be added with VAT, right? And I know that it doesn't make an economic sense at all, but because we don't have a specific regulation for this, you need to apply the general regime, and we do not fall within the exemption for foreign currencies. And the other thing is that you need to obtain from all the clients that are paying you with cryptocurrencies a tax invoice, and it is very difficult to obtain that tax invoice. So basically, whenever you transfer the property of that cryptocurrency again, you need to pay 30% out of the value of the cryptocurrency, which is crazy. I don't know if I made myself clear, but a little bit in a nutshell, those are the problems that we're facing.
Yeah, so you raised 3-4 important points. One is you raised on the discussion around intangible asset. Is it a general practice that crypto is treated as intangible asset? Is there some guidelines in this respect in Mexico?
I think that the first question, yes. Most of the tax advisors right now, they are classifying crypto asset as a general intangible asset. We do not have a lot of guidelines. I would say that we have the Mexican Ombudsman, which is the PRODECON. They issued a criterion just in the case of Mexican resident individuals selling crypto assets, and they somehow acknowledge that you are selling an intangible asset and that you need to determine the capital gain thereof. So I think that that's the position right now, but we don't have more regulation than the criterion that was released by the Mexican Ombudsman.
Got it. And coming to the other point on VAT, e-invoice, and the income tax that you brought in. So one is, it's very prominent that e-invoice is very much required in many Latin countries these days. So there's no possibility of taking the credit if you don't have e-invoice. And that's clear. But the point you raised is VAT and income tax. Does this mean that similar transaction in crypto can be liable for both VAT and income tax?
Yes, yes, that's right. And the reason for this is, at least more from a tax policy perspective, you will expect to be taxed on any gain arising from the value of the acquisition cost against the price on a future sale. But here the problem is that most of the Mexican residents do not have the tax invoice to support the cost. So you will also be liable to pay income tax on the gross proceeds, and that is nothing very good in Mexico. So unfortunately, if someone asks me, and I have had clients that they are trying to start their operations in Mexico with crypto assets, my first recommendation is I would not suggest to start operating in Mexico because we don't have a clear tax regime. So maybe it's better to do it abroad. And that means, and you know this better than me, for that the place of effective management should be located also abroad for not attracting taxation in Mexico. And that is more costly, and we are somehow kicking out the blockchain industry from Mexico because there are not regulation at all, right?
Yeah, but that's surprising. Mexico being one of the prominent countries of LATAM. Do you see any discussion in the industry around it, or do you expect that some more clarification are in its way, or what would be your thoughts around it? Because I would expect that if this has been problem, say in last 2-3 years, people would have raised the problem to the government, and what is the reaction or general sentiments around the market?
Yeah, I mean, like my view right now is that there are alternatives to solve these issues by going abroad to more crypto-friendly jurisdictions. And what you will have is that maybe the Mexican investors will be the shareholders or the members of these type of structures. So yeah, like the first point is there's alternative to operate, but that means going abroad. So when do I see that we're going to have tax regulation, at least in Mexico? I think that in a couple of years, right now, Mexico is in the process of changing its president. So I think that the government will be more focused on this change of administration, the elections, and I'm not sure if the Congress will pay a lot of attention to this issue right now.
Understood. And in terms of, I got your point, what you brought in for the intangible asset, but what about NFTs and other such sort of utility token? How do you guys treat those then?
It's a little bit the same. And the reason for that, I mean, obviously, it depends in the case of an NFT, it maybe, it's not inventory as maybe cryptocurrency, but it is more like an investment that you need to recognize the amortization of it from a tax and accounting perspective, but more or less it's a little bit the same conclusions, I think, with respect to the two taxes. From the one hand, even if it is an NFT and I purchase a piece of art through an NFT platform, I need to have an invoice backing the NFT to be able to deduct the cost of the NFT. And I don't see any type of NFT platform right now giving me a tax invoice that is compliant with all the requirements that I need for such purposes. So it is a little bit the same. Obviously, from an international perspective, what you pay in the case of an NFT after you purchase the NFT, it could be classified different. Like maybe there's a discussion in Mexico if it should be a royalty for the artist that is receiving a part of the profit on future sales. But in a nutshell, I think we have the same problem. So that is VAT and invoices.
Got it. So mainly you say that the demarcation on different types of token would not does not bring much sense. You guys have to see it in similar fashion and see the implication accordingly.
Yeah, I think that we need some type of a specific regime that can help or that recognizes somehow these challenges, these more operational challenges, and that give taxpayers in Mexico the opportunity of claiming the deduction maybe without having this type of invoices if they prove that it is a real economic transaction. And maybe that will be very helpful, but we do not have it right now. And as a tax advisor, I'm obliged to tell you what is the consequence of your transaction with the current regime. And unfortunately, we don't have a good outcome right now. Right now, I think it's the only solution. But obviously, you need to take care of a lot of things because you need to have a real economic presence in the other jurisdiction. And you know that involves to have lawyers from that jurisdiction, accountants from that jurisdiction. And there are startups that they are willing to start this type of business, but that they don't have the money to start in another jurisdiction. So it's somehow a challenge for them, and I understand totally that one.
Yeah, exactly. And I would have thought that Mexico is near to US, and there is a lot happening in US in this space. So there would be some flow effect to Mexico, but listening to you, it seems the flow effect is negligible. And indeed, even Mexican people would be wanting to set up something in US in this case, rather than doing something in Mexico.
Yes, I think that is something that it is happening right now. Obviously, we're talking on a very technical level, right? So there are a lot of investors that they don't have this type of advice, and that they are currently running the business without knowing for sure the implications and these type of challenges. But some Mexicans, they are looking to create an American company, maybe because we have a more clear regime there.
Yeah, understood. Considering that there was a lot of volatility in the crypto market, I remember you a long time back, we also had some discussion on one of your client cases of stablecoin, where we were discussing on the classification of stablecoin. So in terms of stablecoin taxation, also there has been a lot of debate on whether it should be treated as intangible or as a stock or other forms of inventory, and how these should be taxed. How is your experience in dealing with stablecoin? Is it different, or you would say, no, that is also same for me?
No, that is a very good question. And what is funny is whenever I have to advise something new in the cryptocurrency, I think that it will be like almost the same. But when you start going into the details, you see that it is very different. And there, like, also the industry is evolving super fast. So you need to be sure that you're looking to the new data. Let me start with the conclusion, but I think that the line of thinking is different here. The conclusion from a conservative approach is the same that for cryptocurrencies. That is an intangible asset that unfortunately you need to shift VAT when there's a sale between Mexican residents and that you need the invoice. But when we were analyzing this, you have different types of stablecoins, and you have a stablecoin that in principle is backed by the foreign currency. You have stablecoins that are backed by other stablecoins. And they have also like algorithm stablecoins that I don't really understand, to be honest. But in the case of the stablecoins that are backed by real currency, I was hesitating a lot whether you can claim the exemption for VAT purposes, because somehow the stablecoin is just a virtual representation of an asset, and that asset is backed by foreign currency. So maybe there are elements to sustain that you're selling the underlying assets that are foreign currency. The problem that I faced is that when I started analyzing in depth who is keeping this underlying investment, who really can audit that they have the same amount or a similar amount of US dollars, of euros, I didn't find very clear information. So there's a current debate that they are supposed to be backed by foreign currency, but that nobody or no authority is auditing that they indeed have this backing or this support. So that's why I didn't feel very comfortable, because I didn't have legal documents to support that effectively. I was indirectly transferring the property of foreign currency, and hence it opens the possibility of claiming the VAT exemption. But because I do not find right now any legal information of that underlying assets, I don't feel very comfortable right now to say that you can claim the exemption of VAT.
Got it, but I understood always tend to go more on the documentation side. So if there is no legal document supporting that analysis or that argument that it is pegged by foreign currency, you might not be very comfortable. But generally, it's the underlying principle of stablecoin. Did you not thought about that since somebody holding stablecoin can exchange it with the US or currency, or if it is pegged with other cryptocurrency, it can be exchanged with that. So does that not form the basis for a claim of the exemption?
I mean, I think it is you can use it as an argument that you can exchange stablecoin for the USD, but technically speaking, you're exchanging an intangible asset for a foreign currency. So the price that you're receiving is the foreign currency itself. And I don't know, I think that this is not very clear. I would not say that I'm saying that I'm right. I don't have the elements right now to say that whenever you are paying any type of service or good with a stable coin, that you are transferring a foreign currency under Mexican law, because I don't see elements, like very strong elements to sustain that. But I mean, on the other hand, I think that this is one of the cases where it is not very clear, right? Or you can sustain also the other argument. And considering that we don't have regulation, it will be very unfortunate that the Mexican tax administration tried to claim VAT on this type of transactions, but who knows?
Interesting. So what is the general trend in the market around this in Mexico? People are taking diverse opinion?
No, I think most of the people, they are not considering neither of this type of tax implications. I think that people like you and me that we're maybe acquiring stable coins, we are not shifting VAT and filing a VAT return. I think it is something that needs to be regulated, but right now it is operating without regulation. In my own point of view, I think that the Mexican tax administration and the Congress needs to address this in the near future. But what is more important, I think, is for business, because if you're really thinking about investing a lot of money or going to get money from investors and operate in a jurisdiction that does not have a clear landscape of regulation, I think that it is very risky for this type of investor. So most of them will ask you to move your operation to a more crypto-friendly jurisdiction. And I think that at least in Latin America, maybe a jurisdiction like El Salvador, they will get benefits because they are first in the line. And so yes. Something that I think that it is also interesting is that, as you know, Mexico is a neighbor of the US, and there are a lot of remittances from Mexicans that are working in the United States, but they send money to their family. That is one of the most important sources of income in Mexico right now. And they pay a lot of commissions for exchanging the foreign currency US dollar to Mexican pesos. So I think that's something that is interesting. I don't have the data here, but for sure it is happening. Is that maybe there are Mexican residents in the US that they are using crypto platforms to send stablecoins to their families in Mexico to avoid higher commission fees for the exchange. And somehow we're facing with this, and that's why I think it's important to start regulating on a friendly, pro-business manner.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Since we discussed about stablecoin, then coming to the bigger topic of decentralized finance, DeFi offers various products like DEX, lending platform, yield platform, and there could be host range of many other use cases of DeFi. And DeFi space is evolving and will continue to evolve. So how DeFi is seen in Mexico? Do you see a lot of use cases, or the sentiments are similar, like you discussed earlier for other products?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what is happening and what I have seen during the last 2 years is a lot of clients that are asking new type of business. And when it comes to DeFi, it really depends on what are you exchanging, or what are the assets that are being used by the platform or by the business itself. And let me give you an example of this. In the case of, we have here in Mexico a regulation that tries to establish an obligation to platforms, electronic platforms, to withhold VAT and income tax whenever there's a Mexican resident carrying out a barable activity, right? So if you follow this line of thought, if you pay something through a DeFi by means of a Bitcoin, and as I have just said, that sale should be shifted or added with the VAT. In principle, the platform, if the platform operates automatically, you fall within the obligation of withholding VAT for Mexican tax purposes. But there is no party to use because it's a decentralized platform and you don't know where to knock the door at, you know? So I think that we're like entering in this type of discussions. I would say that we have more concerns about right now. We're discussing more about cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, and not a lot about DeFi, but it's a very interesting topic also in Mexico.
Yeah. And the point you brought in, whose liability is to withhold taxes, is a good point. I think we had a lot of issues on open questions around that in Indian law also. But then Indian law brought in a lot of clarity around that when it is the liability of exchange platform to deduct the withholding tax, when it is the liability of other percent to deduct the sale, either the buyer or seller. So there is now a bit of more clarity around that in terms of withholding, but issues in itself, then how do you track valuation part and other angles. Indeed. And coming to the questions, then of course we discussed on a lot of topics from one side of the limb, more on decentralization. And how is CBDC seen as a whole central bank digital currency? Do you see that LATAM is adopting that as or there is some sentiment in the market to adopt CBDC? And what is the sentiment around CBDC in Mexico? And what do you see that how this discussion will shape up in future?
Well, I think that's that's a little bit a funny point because from the one hand, as I said, we just have the fintech law and this regulation that does not cover a lot of transactions in the blockchain industry. And there's like a prohibition imposed by the Mexican Central Bank saying to the financial industry, do not mess and do not play with crypto assets. But on the other hand, the Mexican Central Bank released a public statement whereby they say that they are interested in having a virtual currency as CBDC. So we have a very strong and a very technical central bank in Mexico. So I think that if they are currently analyzing to have a CBDC in Mexico, it is very probable that we are going to have it in the near future. So I think that is good news, at least, that they are somehow trying also to evolve and to have our own currency. But on the other hand, I think that if they're thinking and they are seeing benefits from having a CBDC, they also need to give regulation to the financial system and to other players in the industry to also have the benefits of this new industry. Super.
Yeah, and even in Europe, there is discussion around digital euro. So yes, there are prominent discussion around the world around CBDC, and I think CBDC is also a bit acceptable from the government side. So they're just trying to push CBDC mainly. They don't want to lose the centralized nature of the currency, right? They are trying to use blockchain, but the entire tinge of decentralization still survives or not, God knows that. But still, let's see. But do you think that CBDC, if implemented, could have a lot of benefit in Mexico or any other LATAM countries in terms of financial inclusion or other sort of potential benefit?
Yeah, to be honest, I have not been very aware about the discussions of the potential benefits. Generally speaking, I mean, Mexico and most of the LATAM countries, we do not have like a good financial inclusion. So there are a lot of people in poverty. There are a lot of people that do not have even a bank account, but they start having smartphones. No, that's a little bit funny that they are starting to have access to technology, but maybe somehow they don't like or they don't see to have a formal bank account. So I don't know. I think that introducing a virtual currency by the government can somehow help the financial inclusion of people that have their smartphones or that they don't have maybe access to a bank in their hometowns. So I think it will be good to have them. What happens in Mexico is that usually we wait a little bit to see what other countries are doing and to see the regulations and then see what is best for us. That is being cautious and maybe that is also good, but I think that we need to be in this trend sooner than later.
So that was indeed a very insightful discussion, but I think overall what I could gather that Mexico has not yet developed the laws. So in this regard, so one has to be mindful of when selecting Mexico as a jurisdiction, or have to actually think whether they should land into that market or try to use it as sort of and use another jurisdiction for structuring the transaction rather than Mexico. But any parting thought that you would like to give for anybody willing to set up their presence in Mexico? Because Mexico is a prominent jurisdiction in LATAM with a huge population and other sides. So many companies or people might not want to lose that market.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that was a very good summary, Nupur. So I'm happy that I was a little bit clear with my explanation, because these are very technical matters. I would say that Mexican is a very big and important market, just because the population is quite big. We're neighbors from the US. We have a new trend of nearshoring, where the US is moving a lot of factories where they produce their goods to Mexico instead of China. So the market in Mexico right now is very strong. And I think that there is a lot of appetite of this type of transactions. That for me is a good driver to look at Mexico as a place where you want to operate this type of platforms, this type of business. My only suggestion here is to always have the vibe of professionals and try to have this landing to Mexico, because it is more an virtual or electronic landing and not to having, a fixed place of business in Mexico. So there's very smart ways to respect the law to have this landing in Mexico, by maybe having the platform outside of our country in a more regulated jurisdiction. But I definitely will say that Latin America country is a good market, that we're trying to do our best effort to have regulation. We're looking to our neighbors, to the European Union, to the US, and that there are always ways to carry out this type of businesses in this type of countries, just having like a proper advice from legal and tax counsel.
Yeah, indeed. That's implied. No, that's implied for any sort of law or regulation, because it varies so largely that even we as the person working in this field have to keep ourselves updated with different countries' law, because we might not be aware of all the countries' law. So definitely that's the case. But that was indeed a very insightful discussion, and that provided a bit of clarity on how LATAM in general and Mexico does try to lay down rules and regulation for such a sort of crypto transaction or other crypto product. Many thanks for your time today, and thanks all for tuning in.
No, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry if I don't have all the answers right now, or the answers that we want to hear, but I just want to be like very clear on a technical level on which are the main tax implications. Obviously, there are different type of interpretations, criteria there. So always try to get just a good advice and a good decision that will be helpful for your business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.